The world's 20 brightest minds failed, but a poor waitress cracked a $1 million mystery in 60 seconds. In Elena Morales's heart, the fear of being underestimated weighs heavily, yet her eyes blaze with determination. Can she overcome prejudice to conquer both the tech world and the heart of a lonely millionaire? All right, my dear viewers, get ready for this drama-filled tale of love and forgiveness. Take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and drop a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see people joining us from all around the globe. Late afternoon in Chicago carried the last chill of autumn as gusts from Lake Michigan weaved through the cobblestone streets. Outside, hurried crowds passed towering buildings, some bearing the architectural signature of Lucas Bennett, once lauded as the man who touched the sky with concrete and light. But today, Lucas was not standing in a boardroom, nor on a construction site, nor before a new skyscraper model. He sat in a small diner tucked near the Art Institute of Chicago where the scent of freshly baked bread mingled with hand-roasted Arabica coffee, lending the space a warm, nostalgic glow. A place no one would imagine holding a pivotal moment in a millionaire's life. Seated beside him was Zoe's 9-year-old daughter, her eyes clear like a tranquil lake yet filled with distance. Zoe did not speak. She did not smile. All communication came through her frantic pencil sketches on white napkins. Zoe's little hands trembled from cerebral palsy, but remained resolute whenever they touched paper. Her lines had no conventional form yet. Something about them was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. Lucas had once believed he could reshape the world with his skill and vision, but before his daughter's pure soul, he felt utterly powerless. No ruler or blueprint could unlock the mysteries of Zoe's mind. With each passing day, he watched her drift further into her own realm, a world he had no key to enter. "May I have one buttered toast and a hot cocoa?" Lucas gently said to the approaching waitress. "Yes, sir," she replied softly. That was Sophie Muller, the girl whose smile felt as warm as May sunshine, whom Lucas always saw whenever he brought Zoe here on Wednesdays. She didn't know who he was and didn't need to. In Sophie's eyes, everyone deserved to be heard, even a little girl who could not speak. As Lucas signed the bill, he suddenly froze. Zoe's hand moved more swiftly than usual. The white napkin was now covered by a strange geometric maze, interspersed with vivid swaths of color. Unlike her previous random doodles, this one had composition, depth, emotion. On her way back to the counter, Sophie glanced at the napkin, and she stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes widened, lips parting as if to speak before holding back. Then, unable to contain herself, she leaned in and let her finger trace the pencil strokes. "This painting," she whispered, "is identical to an abstract piece I studied in Professor Roussel's class, the play of shapes, the light and shadow. This is post-structuralist expressionism." Lucas frowned. He had never heard those terms, but Sophie's gaze spoke volumes his mind could not yet comprehend. She was moved not by technique, but by something transcending ordinary art. Zoe remained silent, watching Sophie, then bent back over her sketching as if listening with another, deeper, more subtle sense. Lucas suddenly felt his heart race, not from emotion, but from an intuition, the same gut instinct he had trusted when selecting a project site or negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts. He knew something was beginning. "You studied art?" Lucas asked slowly. Sophie nodded, still eyes fixed on the napkin. "I attended this Institute of Art, but I left in my final year. My family had a crisis. Now I only paint when I'm freer, when I encounter something that takes me back to those days." Lucas was silent. He looked at Zoe still, drawing then at Sophathe, woman whose eyes could hear beauty without words. A thought flashed in his mind. If Zoe could express her world through painting, and if Sophie could understand that language perhaps, between them lay the bridge he desperately sought. And deeper still, perhaps that very bridge would save not only his daughter's spirit, but also the architectural empire teetering on the brink of collapse. Since the moment he caught Sophie's stunned gaze upon Zoe's drawing, Lucas could no longer shake the question from his mind. That night, in his vast apartment, everything arranged with the precision of a master architect, he alone felt lost. His daughter's trembling pencil strokes had become the only thing keeping him awake. There was something in Sophie's eyes, not merely surprise, but as if she had just touched a long-buried memory she'd tried to forget. The next day, Lucas returned to the small diner near the Art Institute, where everything seemed unchanged. The scent of toasted bread, the low hum of the coffee machine, and the quiet bustle of the servers. Sophie was absent. He seized the chance to speak with the managera, silver-haired woman with keen eyes. Lucas mentioned only a few words about the drawing, and in return received a revelation he hadn't expected. According to the manager, Sophie had once been a promising art student. Her paintings had been exhibited in small galleries in the arts district, and praised by instructors for their emotional depth. But it all stopped when her father fell gravely ill. She abandoned school, abandoned exhibitions, and abandoned the burning passion in her heart. After her father's death, Sophie stopped painting. She retreated into the shadows, choosing work as a waitress where few noticed her hands and even fewer cared about the dreams she'd once harbored. Lucas fell silent. He didn't know why her story resonated so deeply with him. Perhaps because he, too, had lost his way when doctors diagnosed Zoe with cerebral palsy, ultimate helplessness of realizing that no amount of power or wealth could change reality. One windless afternoon, Lucas brought Zoe back to the diner. The place was empty. Silence reigned to the extent that one could hear a pencil scratching on paper. Zoe sat in her wheelchair, her clear eyes fixed on the space beyond the window pane. She began to draw this time on a sketchbook Lucas had just bought, as if giving a more formal beginning to a journey neither of them yet knew how to name. Sophie approached. She paused at the sight of the sketchbook, a tiny movement, but enough to betray her anticipation. Without a word, Lucas placed a copy of Zoe's previous drawing on the table. The air seemed to hush. Then, slowly, Sophie withdrew an old leather-bound notebook from her bag. Its pages were yellowed, edges curled with age. On one page, Lucas saw strange images, if echoing Zoe's strokes, not identical, but sharing the same breath, the same language. Sophie's hand lightly brushed the page. Though silent, her eyes held restraint as if touching the past might resurrect its pain. She had not forgotten the drawings she once made, nor the reason she stopped. All these years, she had told herself she'd moved on, but deep down, all she had done was learn to live in silence. Lucas understood without words. He, too, had lived like that, silently watching his daughter who could not speak in words, believing he was doing his best, when in fact he'd been leaving both their emotions adrift in a nameless void. Among the three of them, no grand declaration was needed. Yet when Sophie sat down beside Zoe, their eyes met for the first time, not as customer and server, but as two souls once abandoned by a hectic world and now finding a language to truly hear one another. This time, they painted together. Lucas stepped back to watch. He didn't know whether he was witnessing an artistic collaboration, a miracle, or simply two women healing each other with silent strokes. Whatever it was, for the first time he felt hope, not just for Zoe, but for himself as well. And somewhere, faint yet unmistakable as the gentle first breeze of the season, Lucas realized Sophie's unfinished past was not the end. It was only the first chapter waiting to be continued by her, by Zoe, and by him. The 32nd floor of the glass tower in downtown Chicago once, the blazing heart of Bennett and Company architect Snow, carried a quieter air than ever. Light poured in through the tall windows, reflecting off the polished wooden floor, yet it could not dispel the emptiness that lingered. Lucas had once called this space the dream control room, But in recent months, as the firm faced financial crisis and project after project stalled, that name felt like a luxury. Yet today, the atmosphere was different. In the corner where technical drawings once lay, Lucas had cleared everything away to make room for Zoe. A small wooden table, a glass jar of paintbrushes, and a watercolor set arranged like a palette of possibilities. On the wall hung a large whiteboard covered in blank paper, inviting Zoe to create her own world, a world no one could enter unless invited. Sophie arrived right on time, carrying nothing but her gentle presence and an empathetic gaze. She was no longer the waitress hidden behind a green apron, but a woman slowly rediscovering herself a painter, reconnecting with the hands that once breathed life into canvases. Lucas stepped back to give them space. He settled by the window, feigning concentration on documents, but his eyes never strayed from the scene before him. Sophie seated beside Zoe, head tilted, pointing to a patch of color and then smiling softly when Zoe replied with a small but determined daub of the brush. At first, Zoe was as she always had been, shy, hesitant. She sat motionless before the board, as though peering over the edge of a chasm. But Sophie was patient. She spoke little. She simply tapped the paint box, then traced a few short strokes of vibrant pigment across the paper as an unspoken invitation. Zoe watched, then tentatively followed with her own brush. Day after day passed like a wordless symphony. Soft afternoon light filtered through the windows, bathing the room in the gentle warmth of something blossoming. Zoe began to smile, the rare smile Lucas had dreamed of now present, unexpectedly and beautifully. Abstract paintings emerged, swaths of orange and azure, gentle spirals punctuated by bold accents, as if pent-up emotion was finally breaking free. Sophie corrected nothing. She encouraged, posed questions with her eyes, and gave Zoe full ownership of every choice. No judgment, no coercion, just a caring friend helping a young artist find her inner voice. Then, one autumn afternoon when the river breeze drifted in, Sophie stood before one of Zoe's new work sand froze. Against the shimmering violet-blue background, intersecting geometric forms tilted on an axis-an apparently spontaneous composition, yet uncannily matching the 3D conceptual rendering of the Riverlight complex. A riverside project Lucas had struggled to finalize. Silently, Sophie retrieved Lucas's architectural model, the one he'd left on the drafting table, and placed it beside Zoe's painting. The shapes aligned in a strange synchronicity. But the difference lay in emotion. Lucas's design was clinical, precise, governed by technical standards. Zoe's painting was soft and a Livian invitation to inhabit that space not merely as residents, but as feeling beings. In that moment, Sophie realized Zoe wasn't just painting, she was thinking in images, reflecting her world in color, and communicating not with words, but with the pure intuition of a born artist. From his vantage by the door, Lucas witnessed it all. He leaned against the wooden frame, chest tightening not from sadness, but from a rising warmth. All these years he'd believed he needed to save Zoe. Yet it turned out she and the woman beside her were the ones saving him, pulling him from the days when success was measured only in contracts and skyscraper heights. Now he saw a new door, not leading back to past glories, but to a future he had never dared to dream. A place for Zoe to be herself, where talent was unbound by disability, and where art in its purest form became the language that connected hearts. And it all began with a painting, with a napkin, with a woman carrying an unfinished past, and with a little girl who never spoke, yet drew what the world needed to hear. Dear audience, please take a moment to relax or sip some water, then continue listening to the rest of the story. More surprises await. Comment 1 if you're enjoying this tale, so we know you're still with us. Lucas wasn't sure when he began holding his gaze on Sophie longer than necessary. Perhaps it was when she tilted her head to listen to Zoe, her gentle eyes speaking on the girl's behalf. or when she patiently explained each hue and brushstroke Zoe made, as though translating a language only they could understand. But what truly captivated him wasn't her talent, but the silence she carried, the very silence that coaxed a smile from Zoe, something he had tried for years but never managed to achieve. Lucas had once stood before rooms full of investors, negotiated million-dollar contracts, yet now he felt his own hands empty each time Sophie left the office. She never stayed long, just enough to guide Zoe, to watch the girl create paintings both spontaneous and infused with meaning. Then she would withdraw, gently, as if afraid that lingering would reveal too much. One evening, they stayed late after work. The office was empty, lit only by the desk lamp and scattered with Zoe's drawings. They spoke little. Lucas studied a new painting, vibrant colors intertwining in spirals, punctuated by a central open square. He didn't grasp its meaning, but sensed an unspoken calling. After a few moments of silence, Sophie spoke. Her suggestion startled Lucas: an art exhibition. Not just any show, but one under Zoe's name, a public event inviting critics, journalists, and investors. Not merely to solicit funding, but to declare, this girl has her own language, her own worth, her own voice, even without words. A weight settled in Lucas's chest. He knew such an exhibition could save the firm, persuade impatient shareholders. But the thought of placing Zoe, so sensitive, so fragile, into the spotlight gave him pause. What if it failed? What if people didn't understand? What if Zoe felt the adult's disappointment and shut down forever? He hesitated, yet Sophie's eyes, resolute but never rigid, nudged him to nod, not from reason, but because he trusted her intuition. If anyone knew what was right for Zoe, it was Sophie, not him. As she stood to gather the sketch papers, Lucas reached out and lightly touched her wrist in thanks. A small gesture, but in that moment, time seemed to stop. Neither smiled nor looked away. Their eyes met, not as two people jointly nurturing hope for a child, but as two lonely souls, long abandoned by the world, now finding something familiar in each other. Lucas leaned in, unhurried, and pressed a gentle kiss, light as a breath. No drama, no soundtrack, just two people who found no words to express what they felt. Yet Sophie was the first to step back, not with harshness, but with restraint. She looked at him, her voice hoarse from holding back tears. "I can't fail again." Her words fell into the air like a fine cutworm, yet piercingly deep. Then she left, not running away, but self-protecting, like someone who walks a fragile tightrope between passion and pain, knowing the next fall might be her last. From that day on, Zoe stopped drawing. She neither cried nor sulked. Her eyes simply grew emptier. Lucas saw it each morning as he brought her to the office. The paint box remained. The whiteboard stood ready, but Zoe did not reach for either. She said nothing as always, but Lucas felt the ever-widening void in her spirit. He realized that this silence was not pathological, it was sorrow, the emptiness Sophie left behind, and proof that among the three of them, a bond, thin, faint, but real, had formed. And when it snapped, everything began to fall. Lucas had believed Zoe needed Sophie, but now he understood. He and his daughter both needed her, not just for her talent, not just for an exhibition, but because she was the first to dare believe that a child who never spoke could still make the world stop and listen. Lucas wasn't accustomed to pleading, but this time he set aside his pride. After so many days of Zoe's frightening silence, he knew there was only one place left to turn, the place where it all began. The small diner near the Art Institute of Chicago was just as he remembered. Warm lights spilling through dusted window panes, the scent of toasted bread mingling with coffee in the air. Only his heart felt different. Lucas pushed open the door, gently guiding Zoe's slight, contemplative daughter inside, and saw Sophie at the corner of the counter, leaning over to wipe tables as on so many ordinary afternoons. But when she looked up and saw Zoe extending a hastily sketched drawing, Sophie froze. not from its technique, but from its message. 3 figures: a tall man, a long-haired woman, and a little girl in a wheelchair standing before a gigantic canvas, their hands touching. Below, in uneven scribbles, read the words, "We are together." It was not a request, it was a calling. Lucas said nothing. He laid the letter on the tablet's red Art Institute of Chicago seal unmistakable. Zoe's painting had been selected for Unheard Voices, a major exhibition showcasing emotionally expressive works by extraordinary individuals. The curators, having reviewed anonymously submitted pieces, unanimously chose Zoe's for its ability to convey raw emotion unbound by theory. Sophie took the letter, her hand trembling. Her eyes flicked to Zoe, who remained silent, yet her gaze had changed. No longer empty, but filled with fragile hope. Sophie was afraid. Yet she also knew, if she stepped back now, it wouldn't just be her whose chance was lost. For the first time in years, someone wanted her by their side as they moved forward. And this little girl, who had never uttered a word, was placing her trust in Sophie with every brushstroke. 3 days later, the exhibition opened. The main hall of the Art Institute teemed with people. Paintings hung on white walls, lit just so. In the center stood Zoe's space, a simple yet bold sign reading, "Zoe." Abstract canvases burst with color, devoid of titles or explanations, only emotion. Visitors, from critics and artists to casual passers-by, stood silently before each work. Sophie stood beside Zoe, her hand resting lightly on the girl's shoulder. She introduced not with words but with her gaze, recounting the journey of a small soul learning to express itself not through speech but through light, form, and inner movement. Each listener's eyes welled with tears. No one expected a child with cerebral palsy to tell such powerful stories in color. One piece in fiery red prompted a major patron to exclaim, "It feels like losing someone dear, yet still hoping they remain somewhere." Another in pale violet and orange brought a seasoned art professor to tears. "I've taught art all my life but never seen anything so genuine." And so the funding poured in, not out of pity but admiration. The media began to cover the story. Investors who had once turned their backs on Lucas now returned, eager to help establish the Zoe Arts Fund, a space for education and exhibition for creatively gifted children with special needs. Lucas, standing at the back of the hall, watched in awe. The debts, the financial pressures, the cold calls from shareholders, all seemed to dissolve into the air. In his eyes, only 2 remained: a little girl who had never smiled, and a woman who had once feared to paint, now the world's center of attention. He stepped forward, needing no microphone or speech. Standing shoulder to shoulder with Sophie, the gallery light illuminating her face, he simply said, "You didn't just save the company, you saved our future." Sophie turned to him, her eyes glistening not with regret or weariness, but because, for the first time, she truly felt alive again. No longer the unfinished artist, no longer the waitress hiding her dream. She had been reborn in the eyes of a child and in the unspoken faith of a man who once kept his heart locked tight. And in that moment, amid the crowd, the lights, and the vivid paintings, she knew art does more than spread, it saves. The gallery was now hushed again after its triumphant debut. The frames remained on the walls, but they were no longer the focal point. Every eye was drawn instead to a simple wooden table in the corner where the scent of fresh oil paint still lingered. The sketch paper hadn't yet fully dried, and Zoe, in her plain white dress, held a small wooden brush. That brush belonged to no one else. It was a gift Zoe had made herself. Her hand still trembled, yet her movements were astonishingly steady. She had reclaimed scraps of wood from an old frame, glued them together, painted them into a petite brush, and carved a single word into its handle: Sophie. Sophie stood beside her, no longer the woman hidden behind the service counter. Today she wore an ivory blazer, her hair neatly tied back, her eyes shining without a hint of fear. She bent down to accept Zoe's gift, brushing foreheads with the girl in a silent promise to stand by her not only on this artistic journey but through every step of her unique coming of age. Lucas watched nearby. He produced from his pocket a small object wrapped in silver pin engraved with a painter's palette and 3 brush strokes. 3 people, 3 souls, 1 journey. His hand shook slightly as he handed it to Sophie and from emotion, but because he realized the dream he once thought shattered was taking on a new form, more beautiful and more profound. "Together," he said, his voice husky as if dusted by time, "we will spread Zoe's art." Sophie nodded and pinned it to her lapel. No more words were needed. Her eyes full of resolve and warmth said it all. In that instant, none of them were their former selves. Gone was the architect pressed by financial ruin. Gone was the waitress who'd abandoned her dream. Gone was the silent child. They were a team embarking on a new journey. Weeks later, the Zoe's Palette Foundation officially launched its mission to bring art to children with special circumstances across the United States. Lucas managed the organization, orchestrated operations, and secured funding. Sophie served as creative director, designing programs and inspiring volunteers and art instructors. And Zoe, a girl once misjudged as silent, became a living symbol of hope. A child who never spoke yet made the world listen. At the foundation's unveiling ceremony, Zoe painted a brand new work. Its colors were vibrant yet orderly. The shapes no longer spiraled aimlessly but formed a solid framework, as if laying the very foundation of the future. In one corner stood 3 small figures, hands clasped, framed by an opening wall. No translator was needed, everyone understood. This was the future, being painted day by day with trust and love. Among all their achievements, the greatest lesson was not success itself, but a simple truth. Every child carries a masterpiece within. Sometimes, all it takes is someone patient enough to listen, gentle enough to guide, and brave enough to never give you even when the world does not understand. This story is not over. With every new painting, a new chapter unfolds. With every brushstroke, a once-forgotten voice finds its way back. And perhaps one of us holds an invisible brush now, waiting for the moment to begin. Thank you for sharing this heartfelt story with us. If it has touched your heart, please share this video with your friends, and loved one, especially those living in the United States. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment below, and, if you can, tell us where and when you're watching. Nothing would delight us more than knowing this journey reached you at just the right time. We have many more stories like this waiting for you. And who knows, maybe the next story will be part of your own memories. See you in the next video.